This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Essayist Thomas Frank has a three-point plan for Democrats to use in campaigns that he says will be massively popular. Stanford law professor Deborah Rhode has a new book out called What Women Want. And Bill Press talks with California Congressman John Garamendi, who voted against the president on authorizing U.S. involvement in Syria. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Provocative essayist Thomas Frank says Democrats can win elections with a three-point platform that he says would be massively popular. 1, enforce antitrust laws. 2, hold Wall Street accountable. And 3, do something about college tuition. And we say hello to Thomas Frank, political analyst, historian, journalist, writes for Salon. He's the author of a number of books, including What's the Matter with Kansas and Pity the Billionaire. Thomas Frank, thanks for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
The pleasure is all mine, sir.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to have you with us. You have been disappointed in President Obama's performance. We've talked about this before, saying he's run out of gas. Would things improve, you think, if Hillary were elected in 2 years?
Well, there's no way to say. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Hillary as a person. She's very smart. She's clever, and I think her heart is in the right place. But I thought that about Obama as well,
Right.
So I just don't know. My problem is that I'll tell you one of the reasons that I was a strong supporter of Barack Obama back in 2008 is because I was excited that to get new personnel in Washington, people that weren't part of the Clinton administration. I think that Democrats made a lot of mistakes in the Clinton years, and I was hoping that Obama would chart a new path, and that's not what happened. He immediately brought all the same people back. And if Hillary obviously would do the same thing, this is the people who were on her staff. This is the people who ran her campaign last time around. So I actually would, much as I like her personally, I don't think you'd see a big change of direction. I don't think you'd see that at all.
Do you think there's any real chance that a true progressive could be elected president? I mean, maybe it would have to be perhaps under an independent banner?
I think a true progressive most definitely could be elected president, and they could do it as a Democrat. The problem is not that their politics are unacceptable. There is enormous demand for certain parts of the progressive agenda. I mean, you need to look no further than Barack Obama's overwhelming victory in 2008, when that's what people thought they were voting for. The sort of politics of Franklin Roosevelt looked really, really good right at that moment.
Yeah.
And the problem isn't that the politics are outrageous or anything. The problem is that it would be very tough for a progressive to raise the money.
Mm.
The politics are unacceptable to people who have money.
Right.
It's really
well, and especially when you're
funny
talking
world we live in.
Yeah, right. Corporate money. I mean, don't touch that.
Yeah.
You recently listed 3 things that Obama could do to rescue some of his reputation on the left. What are those things?
Well, it's not his reputation on the left; it's his reputation. Period. And this is actually a very interesting thing. I've been thinking about things that he could do. He's sort of trapped by Congress at the moment, or that's how he depicts his situation. He's trapped by this Congress that won't allow anything, and so he's going to do all these small bore things. He's going to sign a lot of executive orders, and he's going to hold a lot of convenings, and I said, come on now. This is the most powerful man on earth. There are things he can do that are big things, momentous things that will completely change the conversation. If he felt like it, he could still be, there could still be some audacity in this administration. And so these are things that would be popular across the board. Now, they are progressive things. They're things that I'm suggesting, that liberal me is suggesting. but they would be popular across the board. And let's see if I can remember what they are. The first one is to, accountability for Wall Street. Get Attorney General Holder out there. Start him prosecuting. Me and several of my journalist colleagues could tell him how to do it. It's pretty straightforward. Tell him where to look and what,
The guy with his hand in the cookie jar, get him.
Yeah, that's right. Right. I'm sorry, I got them confused. That was actually number two, but the first one was that antitrust policy, and this is something we haven't heard about for a while, but the antitrust laws of this country were passed 100 years ago, and they are up to the president, to the administration, to enforce them. And what happened was during the Reagan administration, the president and his advisors decided that they would stop enforcing antitrust laws. They were the guy that persuaded them to do this was a guy called Robert Bork, a famous judge at the time. You might remember Reagan nominated him to the Supreme Court, and it didn't work out. But he wrote a famous book where he said antitrust was stupid. The Reagan people believed this. They stopped enforcing antitrust, and so today you've got this kind of outrageous situation where these enormous companies control entire industries. Like, for example, I'll just give you one example, the beer industry. 80% of it is controlled by two companies. Now, when I was little, in the 60s and 70s, that would never be allowed. That would be automatically, the Department of Justice would step in and break those companies up.
Yeah.
Today, that's permitted. Well, Obama could reverse that tomorrow if he felt like it. It's strictly up to him. He could call in Eric Holder and say, I want to do this differently. And he actually used to talk about this when he was on the campaign trail back in 2008 about doing something about concentration in certain sectors of the economy and getting a real functioning free market back in there. He hasn't done anything along these lines, and it's strictly up to him. Congress could not stop him. There's no way. And the third thing is, tuition, college tuition, which is just completely out of control in this country, and which Obama has spoken about many times, what an outrage this is. Got a whole generation of students, college graduates in debt. This is a terrible situation that we're in. He could get tough with these universities tomorrow if he felt like it. The government gives these institutions are subsidized from, in the most extraordinary manner, everything from, the sort of tax abatements that they enjoy to the outright subsidies that they get from the Defense Department. He has a lot of leverage over these institutions, and he could start using that tomorrow if he felt like it, to force them to do this. All three of the things that I just mentioned would be popular across the board. In fact, after I wrote about it on Salon.com, you're not going to believe this. I got an email from a Tea Partier who told me that he agreed with all three of these things, but then went off on some, thing about how Obama will never do them because he's, this figure of evil or whatever it is. But these are things that would be massively popular, and he could start on all of them tomorrow, and these would change the conversation in this country.
You mentioned the college tuition, that third item. You recently wrote a screed against the way modern universities are run to the detriment of students.
Yeah.
Should young people abandon the university system in favor of a smaller scale education and training?
Oh God, I don't know. The problem is I don't think there's any alternative at this point to going to the universities, and that's one of the reasons that it makes people so mad.
Yeah.
Is that they don't have. There's no way out of it. Tuitions are now at a lot of these sort of prestigious schools are above $60,000 a year, and parents and students both look at this and they're furious because there's nothing else that's going to offer you the same thing. There's no other institution in America that delivers the same product. It just doesn't exist, and so you're stuck. And that's the problem, and that's why you have to have, the government has to step in and take control of this somehow.
Yeah.
So the article that you're referring to, which ran in the Baffler magazine, was called Academy Fight Song, and I wrote it. I started writing the article I meant to write about one little aspect of what's wrong with universities. But as I did my research, it's just more and more things. It's as though everything associated with higher education is a ripoff. And read the article, listeners, and you will see what I mean. It boggles the mind.
Well, and the amount of debt you have, because most people don't have that kind of money to pay these tuitions, right? I mean,
no one, very
few people do. So there you've got a kid that's maybe 22 years old and has hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt.
That's right. And I know people with $100,000 in debt. It happens.
Yeah.
It happens to a lot of people.
Yeah. That's terrible.
And you can't start off life that way. You can. People are doing it, but I think back to my own generation, where I got out of college with pretty minimal debt, or my dad's generation, GI Bill, it was free,
right?
And now we're saddling kids with $100,000 in debt for the same product. It's an outrage.
Yeah, and the wage that people are being paid, and we can take this for another couple of hours.
We could talk about this all day.
Right. Capitalism, is it still functional? And I ask because if you listen carefully to a lot of Tea Party followers, they kind of sound a lot like Occupy Wall Streeters, in a sense.
Capitalism is one thing, free markets. I don't like any of this language. Let me put it this way. It's not, you can call it capitalism when 80% of a market is controlled by two companies.
Mm-hmm.
But that's no, it's not. It doesn't work. Of course, it doesn't. A situation like that is not. It doesn't work. I think of the crazy things that this is a subject that I know a lot about. All the crazy things that went on in the mortgage industry in the last decade. That puffed up the real estate bubble and led to this recession that we're still dealing with. It's because there was no supervision of any kind. These companies were able to do whatever they felt like. And, so on the one hand, you have essentially monopolies all over the place. And then in these other parts of the economy, there's basically no law at all. And then you and me, right, we live under this, or if you live in a place like Ferguson, Missouri, you live in this, environment where you are intensely and massively policed.
Mm-hmm.
So no, it doesn't work.
Before we let you go, you as a journalist, what's your view of the once liberal Washington Post being bought by Amazon's Jeff Bezos and turned over to a publisher whose entire adult life has been in service to Ronald Reagan?
Well, I saw that in the paper. I stopped expecting good things from the Washington Post. I'm sorry, I'm so cynical and negative, but
that's why we have you on.
I've been pretty negative about the Washington Post for a long time, and so that did not surprise me.
Yeah.
Speaking as a liberal, I've been disappointed by them for a long time. I think their op-ed page, they've got this sort of perfect position. They're the monopoly newspaper, or almost the monopoly newspaper in the most important city in the world. You'd think they would, they'd make a little trouble, but they don't. Every now and then they'll have a big scoop, like Watergate or like the Abramoff scandal. They do this from time to time.
They haven't had a big scoop since Watergate.
There's been a lot since Watergate, but they.
No, I know.
But they're, on a day-to-day basis, no, it's there's just not a lot.
Yeah.
Nothing surprising there. So.
Okay.
I'm really sorry to say that. It could be a great newspaper if Bezos wanted it to be, but.
Well, it's also facing the same problem that every newspaper in the country is facing. And
they're dying.
Exactly.
You mean death?
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
All right, Thomas.
Well, I got out of print. I'm not in print anymore.
Right.
I'm only online now, which is it's a new thing for me. I'm learning a lot.
Yeah, well, and that's it's been going that way, and it's not stopping anytime soon. So
that's right.
Thomas Frank, political analyst, historian, journalist, writes for Salon, writes all over the internet. You can find him anywhere out there. He's also the author of a number of books, and they might still actually be in paper production.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
What's the matter with Kansas? And Pity the Billionaire. Thomas, always a pleasure having you on americasdemocrats.org.
You got it anytime, man.
Okay, thanks very much. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. It took the National Football League to turn the spotlight back on women's rights, and Professor Deborah Rhode answers the question of what women want, politically, socially, and economically. We'll talk to her about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
When 5 Supreme Court justices decreed that corporations are entitled to full free speech rights in our elections, and that corporate money is a form of speech that cannot be restricted, they produced a nightmare tsunami of corporate cash that is now drowning our people's democratic rights. After all, if money is speech, then speech is no longer free. It's for sale. This year, we're seeing what the court's absurd edict is costing us. First, the corporate purchase of political speech has in fact reached tsunamic force in the current congressional races. Spending on TV ads will likely top $2 billion, 70% higher than 4 years ago when the court issued its Citizen United money ruling. Second, the bulk of this speech is not being bought by candidates or parties, but by secretive outside front groups that hide the corporate interest funding the ads. In Senate races alone, these shadow groups have already run some 150,000 TV spots. The Koch brothers' main front group, Americans for Prosperity, is by far the biggest buyer of speech, having laid out $44 million on congressional races in just the first 6 months of this election year. Third, and most pernicious, the court-created right of moneyed front groups to flood the airwaves has handed them the power to dictate any campaign's message. The ads of those secret fronts now define the issues and even the candidates themselves before the race really gets going. Worse, because the outside groups are anonymous, their speech consists almost entirely of the nastiest, most vituperative attacks on candidates they oppose, turning our election year discourse into a toxic slime fest that turns off voters and shrivels turnout. This is Jim Hightower saying, to join others and help stop the corporate purchase of the people's political speech rights, connect with movetoamend.org. That's www.movetoamend.org.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Stanford law professor Deborah Rhode says the feminist movement is in a bit of a valley and needs to do a better job of informing the electorate about the economic problems facing women. And we say hello to Deborah Rhode, who is the Ernest W. McFarland Professor of Law, the director of the Center on the Legal Profession, and the director of the program in Law and Social Entrepreneurship at Stanford University. She has just written a book called What Women Want, An Agenda for the Women's Movement. Deborah Rhode, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you for having me.
Well, why is it that the vast majority of Americans agree with the principles of feminism but will not identify themselves as feminists?
You know, it's a terrific question. When you give people the dictionary definition of feminism as someone who supports social and economic and legal equality for women, 2/3 to 3/4 of women will sign on. But if you just say, do you consider yourself a feminist, then only 1/4 to 1/2 of women will agree. And I think that speaks volumes about the pejorative connotations that the term feminism has come to have. It connotes man-hating, humorless, whining, activist, radical, all sorts of adjectives that women in general don't want to have attached to themselves.
And probably those are probably unfair adjectives. Wouldn't you agree?
I think they really misdescribe the commitment that being a feminist really implies, which is, as the dictionary definition gives it, to social, economic, and political equality for women.
Mm-hmm. So is it a toxic word then? Feminism, is that a toxic word?
Well, it's no accident that my book doesn't put it in the title. And I think the sort of leaders of the women's movement are divided themselves about whether to avoid the term or try to reclaim it. And I think we need to do a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm. Now, you quote a number of women celebrities regarding feminism, and one that stands out is Beyonce, who asks why you have to label yourself as anything. How do you answer that?
Well, I think everything depends on the context, and in many contexts you don't need to label yourself as anything. But I think when it comes to talking about issues on which women have strong interests, particularly those that are unmet by the current legal order, then it does a disservice to women in general if you fail to identify yourself as someone who cares about those issues.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Deborah Rhode, law professor at Stanford University. She's just written a book called What Women Want, an agenda for the women's movement. Your book cites examples of the demonization of feminism by the news media. Overall, wouldn't one see the mainstream media as having been in the forefront of most progressive social movements just by shining light on the issues?
Yes, and I think in general, the media has been a strong ally of the women's movement in trying to attract public attention to the issue. But when it comes to use of the term feminist, I think the media has done a disservice historically in the way that it's talked about the pejorative images that are connected with that term, and ultimately I think it ends up reinforcing the problem it pretends only to describe.
How do you change the conversation so that a word like feminism either goes away or just isn't used in the way that it is being used by so many people?
Well, it would help a lot if you had more women like Hillary Clinton, who was willing to openly self-identify as a feminist, or Sheryl Sandberg, women who command a lot of public respect, identifying with that term.
Now, another thing in the book, it deals a little bit with the issue of a woman's appearance. But doesn't science tell us that attractive people of both sexes have an advantage?
It does. Yeah,
and besides, would you really suggest that someone not try to be better looking, or that an attractive woman should try to look less attractive? Is that fair to say, or?
No, I don't think that's the answer. I think the answer is to stop thinking about this in individual terms and think about it in collective terms, and sort of what are the cultural messages. And what we should be worried about is not the people who are attractive, but the people who are unattractive and who suffer discrimination as a result. And that, I think, we want to try to stamp out.
And I've got to ask you, if you take a look back at, say, the 60s and the late 60s in particular, and you move forward to today, have we improved a lot? Obviously, we haven't improved enough in terms of equality, gender equality, but have we improved a lot, or is it a case of a couple steps forward, a step back?
Oh, I think that there's been an enormous change in the way that we understand these issues. When I went to law school, I had no course by a woman, let alone about women's issues, and they weren't even on the agenda. And now, of course, we've made huge progress in identifying the problems. It's just that we've made less progress in gaining support for the solutions. And
there still is a glass ceiling out there.
There's very much a glass ceiling. Women are a third of MBA graduates, but only 4% of chief executive officers. Mm-hmm. In law, women are half of the new entrants to the profession, but 16% of the partners in major firms. So women are just overrepresented at the bottom and underrepresented at the top in every major occupation.
Mm-hmm. What can really help change this whole thing? I mean, because it's in so many different professions, I hate to say it, but it's still a man's world, if you will. How do we break that? How do we change that?
Well, I think one place to start is by placing more women in leadership positions and more men who care about those issues into leadership positions. In the United States ranks 78th in the world, behind Saudi Arabia, even in representation of women in political leadership. Women are half the electorate, but 18% of Congress, 10% of governors, a quarter of legislatures. So we've got to, I think, and that matters because women are disproportionately likely to make women's issues a priority. Mm-hmm. So we've got to change the leadership structure in both the public and the private sector in order to make real progress on some of these issues.
I mean, I know one glaring one, and you mentioned her a little while ago, but we still have not seen a woman president.
We haven't, but we're certainly getting closer.
Yes, we are, and we may in a couple of years. Deborah Rhode is a law professor at Stanford University. Her recent book, What Women Want, An Agenda for the Women's Movement. Deborah, thank you so much for your time with us today. We would love to have you back and talk more about it.
Thank you so much.
All right, and this is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, California Congressman John Garamendi.
Some members of Congress are still around on the job. Congressman John Garamendi, one of them, here in the studio with us this morning from California's 3rd Congressional District. Congressman, good to see you.
Always good to be with you, Bill.
You had nothing more to do, is that right? And there are no other issues that Congress could...
There's this small war in the Middle East, which we really didn't vote on the war. We voted on arming the Syrian rebels, but not on whether we ought to go to war or not. And I think there is a transportation bill. There is the funding of government. We did kick that can down the road until December.
December 11, right.
December 11.
And all the immigration problems have been solved, so we don't have to worry about those anymore, right?
Well, those are still out there, actually, Bill. I don't want to say you're wrong this early in the morning, but no, we did not solve the immigration problem. And there is this issue of wildfires. It's bizarre the way we fund the fighting of wildfires. We give them a certain amount of money, and then we give them a certain amount, the Forest Service, a certain amount of money to protect the forest, thin the forest, get rid of the undergrowth and all of that. And then we use all of that money to fight the fires, and we never get around to preparing the forest for the next fire. It's terrible.
Right.
It's crazy, and a lot of things need to be done. And instead, Boehner sent us home.
Yeah. Well, good to see you, and thank you for coming in this morning before you head home. At the half hour, Wayne Pacelle will be joining us. Wayne Pacelle is the CEO and president of the National Humane Society, a good friend. He'll be in studio with us as well. Congressman, we got a lot to get to. President Obama, was down in Tampa a couple of days ago, and he went by do you see this? He went by a grade school, and one of the kids asked him if he fought in the Civil War. Obama says, I'm not that old.
Well, he does have white hair now after 6 years in office.
I know he does. Anyhow, Jimmy Fallon had his take late night show last night on the president's visit. Here he is.
During President Obama's visit to an elementary school yesterday, one little boy actually asked him if he ever fought in the Civil War. Obama told the boy he did not, but he reenacts it with Congress all the time. And it's just very
That was a good response.
That was a good response. Yeah, but the congressman, he reenacted with Congress, except this time in the House and in the Senate, Congress went along with the president. Surprise, surprise. The vote in the House to arm the Syrian rebels was 273 to 156. In the Senate yesterday was 78 to 22. How did you vote?
I voted no. Very, very concerned, both about the success and probable failure of such an effort. But more importantly, since this whole thing started way back in August, I've said, wait a minute, we're getting into a new war. And Congress has the constitutional responsibility of declaring war or not, and we need to have that debate. This is a side piece of that total thing, and to date, we have not debated this issue, and the president, frankly, says, I don't need you guys. I can do this without you, and
right.
I think he's absolutely wrong.
No, you've been very strong in issuing that call for a new authorization of war, right. Basically with Congress doing its constitutional duty on the War Powers Act.
Exactly.
And yet the president says no, the authorization for the use of military force enacted on September 14, 2001, that covers it. And I also saw last week he added that even the authorization for the war in Iraq,
which he declared as over.
Exactly. That he says that covers it. He's saying under those two, he's got all the authority he needs. You dispute that?
Well, I do. Lawyers get paid to take words and to bend them. And the president also said that we should abolish the 2001 authorization to use force because we ought not have unending authority for the president to wage war. And now he's using that unending authority. I think it's wrong. And I really think we need to debate it with the representatives of the 300-plus million Americans, and we need to have a robust debate about it. Now, the debate on the arming the Syrian rebels was on arming the Syrian rebels. It didn't get into the issues of the Iraq and Syria airstrikes and whatever else there might come from that.
Right. Why wouldn't Congress demand to me, the question is not whether the president should seek approval from Congress. The Congress should say, of course, we want to vote. I mean, this is our job, right?
Well, that's my argument. I don't know that I say it as well as you just said it, but that's my argument. Is that, well, wait a minute. Constitution says only Congress can declare war. There's a very, very good reason for that, and that is war is a big deal. We should know that. We've been involved in wars now for 25 years in the Middle East, beginning, if you even want to go back to Ronald Reagan, when the Marines barracks were bombed in Lebanon. Over 200 Marines killed. So we've been at this a long time, and we need to try to figure out a better way of dealing with the Middle East. It hasn't worked. Iraq didn't work. Afghanistan, to say that Afghanistan, 1,500 miles away from where this fighting is now taking place? No, we really need to debate this for the American people. They need to understand all of the implications.
And wouldn't the president be in a stronger position if he had a vote of Congress behind him on the authorization for war, not just arming the Syrian rebels, right?
I agree. He would have it. Now, yesterday he claimed he has it, that the arming of the Syrian rebels affirms his policy. Well, it affirms one of the four policies that he put forward. It didn't go to the other three. Mm-hmm. The other three are important. Airstrikes, no boots on the ground, and how do you stop the flow of money, the support that the ISIL is getting. Those are important, and we need to debate that. We need to understand that. There's also something that was hidden away in the continuing resolution. Now, the president back in July said he needed $50 billion for Afghanistan, winding down that war and dealing with Yemen and the like. Now, August comes around. ISIL is now a big problem. The continuing resolution actually provides $80 billion for overseas contingencies, so there's an additional $30 billion over and above what the president requested just 3 months ago. Did anybody discuss that? No.
And what is that money supposed to be used for?
Well, let's put it this way. Yesterday in the Armed Services Committee hearing, Secretary Hagel said, well, some people describe that as a slush fund for war. He said, of course, that's not it.
Oh.
But that's what he said.
Wow.
So it's really there for the military, the president, commander-in-chief, to use in overseas military operations. And we, the representatives of the people of America, need to say, exactly what do you have in mind, Mr. President? Does this mean we're going to continue in Afghanistan? If so, how long? How much is it going to cost us? Yemen, Somalia, whatever. Important things to be sure. But just to pass $30 billion additional dollars over and above what the president requested just 3 months ago, for what purpose? It's there. He can spend it.
Yeah. Remember Everett Dirksen, the great senator from Illinois, once said, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. Yeah.
This is real money. Think what we could do in America with $30 billion to educate our kids.
Right. Now, do you think so this vote on arming the Syrian rebels was, as you've correctly pointed out, just addressed one phase of the president's overall plan, did not get to the authorization for war. When Congress comes back after the midterm elections, will there then be a debate on authorization? Will there then be a vote, rather, to authorize authorization for war?
You got the wrong guy sitting at your table. You should ask Speaker Boehner. He controls. The leadership of the House is in Republican hands, and they control the agenda totally. Nothing comes to the floor for a vote without Speaker Boehner and his leadership saying, okay, we're going to do it. I hope we do. I know there's a significant contingent of Republicans.
Yeah, you've called for that. You wrote a letter. Have you have other members of the House? What are you hearing from other members of the House, Democrats and Republicans?
Keep in mind that the Defense Authorization Act passed in July. Over 300 members of the House said no expenditure in Syria without a vote. Well, I guess maybe we took a vote, at least on arming rebels, but does that mean airstrikes? I don't think so. ISIS come along, and it has changed the complexion, but there's a strong minority in both parties. I would say maybe 30% to 40% of the members of both parties that believe very, very strongly that we must have a declaration of war. Another word for that is an authorization to use force. They're one and the same. We'll see. We'll see what happens during the election. And I think all of us need to go back and explain to our constituents why we either believe the Constitution is correct and we have the responsibility, or the Constitution's wrong and the president can do what he wants to do.
Yesterday, after the vote in the Senate, the president made some remarks from the state dining room at the White House, and he repeated again, that's redundant, I guess, but he repeated his pledge that American forces in Syria there are no ground troops, no combat boots on the ground, however you want to phrase it. It's just going to be airstrikes alone. Is that realistic? Can we accomplish that mission without American forces being in combat positions?
I think the answer is yes, if the Iraqi army and the Iraqi government get its act together, they're strong enough, they're enough and they have the sufficient forces to push ISIL out. But that can only be done if there is a political consensus within Iraq. If the Sunnis refuse to join the government or have no faith in the Baghdad government, then I think the answer is no. And the only way it could then happen is with American troops on the ground. And I'm saying we've done that. It didn't work. In fact, there's a reasonable argument, one that I would make, that the invasion of Iraq to get rid of Saddam Hussein unleashed the whirlwind, and we are now reaping that result.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you. But the other that's a big if, by the way, the Iraqi the Iraqi military, a big if, because we saw how well they performed when they first.
The first contingent of military that the president sent over in late August was specifically for the purpose of assessing the Iraqi military and coming to a conclusion, can these guys fight? Of the 50 brigades, maybe 24, 25 are capable of fighting. Exactly what that means, I think that's probably leadership, support of the government or not supporting the government. But that is still a very, very sizable force and probably sufficient. But it isn't going to work unless there is a coalition that is within the Iraqi people that they're going to get rid of ISIL.
Right. So that's one if, a big if. The other big if is the one we've been talking about. it seems to me, is arming the Syrian militia. I mean, what have they done for the last 3 years? And how long is it going to take to bring them up to speed?
Well, a minimum of a year to train and prepare just 6,000.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to do it. Presumably for the purpose of defending their villages, which is a good thing to do, but not for offense against ISIL or against Assad. So where are we going here? This is not going to push ISIL out of Syria. It's certainly not going to dethrone Assad. Will it protect the villages of those folks that are trained? Perhaps. We'll see. But clearly this is not going to be sufficient. And keep in mind that for 3 years we've been trying to figure out who to work with. And we could not in 3 years figure out who the good guys were.
Right.
And now we're going to be able to do it. Well, maybe.
How much time are we talking about with this operation, do you believe? What are they telling you at the hearings, when you have these private, top secret hearings with the military?
Well,
this is not going to be over in a couple of months, right?
Oh, of course not. Of course not. This we're back into, if this proceeds full-blown, we're going to be back into the Middle East wars for another decade. This is going to last for a long, long time. The underlying problem doesn't go away with military action. First of all, there is a schism within the Islam, and that has been going on since 600. So it's 1,400 years that they've been fighting amongst themselves, and that is a major element in what is going on there today. And then you also have the issues of 60, 70% of the youth are unemployed in these countries. So you have very bad economic conditions. You have unemployment. You have young men and women that have nothing to gain in their old situation, and maybe to gain martyrdom and glory in a war. And so you've got those kinds of things going on, and that has to be addressed. None of what we're talking about addresses certainly the sectarian issue. I mean, we're not going to solve that. And the underlying economic issues are, frankly, going to get worse as a result of war.
Congressman John Garamendi here in studio with us. You can find him, of course, online at garamendi.house.gov. Congressman, the president went down to Atlanta this week. We're talking about one war in Iraq, but he declared war on Ebola. And I know you've had several briefings in the House on this. How serious a threat is it, as you see it? What have you been told?
It's a very, very serious threat in West Africa and has the potential of leaping to other megacities around the world, basically, but most likely Africa. This is a very serious problem. And fortunately, the U.S. government and the military are beginning to take some very important steps in trying to set in place the infrastructure to address the issue. Failure to do that, and it's going to be a real serious problem, and I think could lead to the collapse of the governments and civil society in several African countries.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
It can be very, very serious.
And the military's role, we're sending 3,000 troops to Western Africa to do what?
Well, to set up a public health care system, to set up the hospitals, to train as many people as we possibly can on how to deal with this. You need to take those cases that are infected, and you need to isolate them. You cannot leave them in their communities. And in an urban setting, it's just an opportunity to spread like a wildfire through the urban area. So you need to get a grip on this, and we need to do it really fast. This is a big, big challenge, not just for those countries affected, but for the other mega cities in Africa and quite possibly beyond.
Congressman John Garamendi, thanks so much for coming in today.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Thomas Frank, Deborah Rhode, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.